Hi, welcome Juliana. Juliana is going to be talking to us about project management, and pretty much like everyone assumes that they have a project management tool and how to use it, but it's really about making sure you can use it efficiently, meaning like you're not always checking on it and being like, where's it going? Like who's involved in it? And it's still a mess. So she's going to tell us all like how to set it up and the right way to set it up, and then the rules in place and how to actually make sure that the work gets done. Take it away.
Awesome. So I'm just going to do a screen share. And then, awesome. Can you see that?
I can.
Great. So yeah, so we're going to talk about project management. And sometimes it can seem like projects get a little chaotic. And what does that really look like? Whether it's our projects or task lists, all of the to-dos, whether it's sticky papers, notebooks, in the back of envelopes, right? Like how are we really managing these projects? And what I want to cover today is really around, like how is the inefficiencies of this costing us money, right? And how if we can actually get things more succinct and working with better flow and making our operation a lot smoother, how do we actually like make more money in terms of profitability? Because it's huge, the amount of time that we spent when things are disorganized. So, right off the bat, we want to talk about like your tech stack. And the tech stacks are different depending on what kind of business you have and at what level you are. And then talk about things falling through the cracks. Like I hear this term so much from all of my clients, and when I get on sales calls, it's like, oh my God, can you just stop, having things fall through the cracks? And then lastly, it's how do you know if you're ready to hire someone to be your project manager? Like how do you know how to hire the right person? If you already have a project manager, how do you know that they're like the super project manager, right? Or how do we optimize them? And if that person is you, how do we optimize you? Right? And really thinking about that in terms of it. All right. So next, I want us to think about project management like a conveyor belt. And what I mean by that is when we think about our businesses, right? And everything that is, that it takes to produce that thing that you want to produce, right? And one of those things is making sure that whether it's a service, it's a product, your deliverables, your projects, like we want to make sure that they have good quality. And as you're starting to scale, right? Or even as you're just trying to manage what you have, right? We want to make sure that the quality that we have maintains its integrity and it's great. So if we think about it like a conveyor belt, all of the projects and tasks that you have, they have to be put together, right? And they have to go onto this conveyor belt and they have to be moved along in order to output this awesome, shiny product or service that's consistent time and time again. So you want to think about it as like, what is this conveyor belt? And who is also managing this conveyor belt, right? Like where's the conveyor belt getting stuck? Where are we missing components? We're still falling off the conveyor belt, right? And so that's really how we can think about our project management. And here's an awesome stat that I love is that training increases productivity by 25%. And one of the biggest tools that you're going to use in your training is around your project management. So that increases your productivity by 25%. So just getting all of those things in place is going to create efficiencies for you. Now, one of the first things we want to talk about is your tech stack. Now, what is the technology, the apps, the web apps, the tools that we're using in order to house all of this knowledge that's in your head, or that's being created by freelancers or other people that you're working with to make sure that the communication is flowing and that projects are getting done. And one of the biggest things, I love this picture. One of the biggest things are the biggest indicators that there's something glitching with our project management is our deadlines, right? So that's one of the things. Now, whether they're personal deadlines, that you set for your internal projects, or whether they're deadlines for clients, or whether your team, whether they're employees or freelancers, whether their deadlines are being met, what happens when we have like fuzzy deadlines, is a great indicator to our project management. So one of the things that I would ask the group is, what are the side effects of these deadlines not being met? right? And so as I had mentioned before, it's profitability, right? Unhappy clients. So sometimes, like clients are like, oh man, I really, really, like what's going on with that thing, and they might love you, right? And so they'll let it go and like things slide. But, at the end of the day, you're not providing what you said you were going to do. There's project delays, right? Whether they're internal or external. And then project delays, I had a conversation with someone yesterday who is a project manager. And we were talking about how sometimes, like deadlines in a team become so, like we become resigned to the deadlines. It's like, like they always move the deadline, so who cares, right? And so there's a resignation sometimes that happens with deadlines on both the client side and the team side. So then what happens is the clients are like, well, you guys don't meet your deadlines, we're not going to meet ours. So you have like poorly behaved clients, you have account managers with massive overwhelm, and sometimes you get complacent employees because they're like, no one really cares. So what's the point, right? And sometimes we can even get like that, like we have a client, we're like, well, right? So there's a complacency that sometimes happens as a side effect of not meeting deadlines. But when we do have them, we get better retention, both on the client side and on our team side, because the team is like, oh, okay, there's good leadership here, we have good deadlines, like all of that stuff is happening. So so that's just like, and that's just deadlines. So if I can get you guys to think about like deadlines as a tool to increase your retention across the board, that's huge, right? All right. Now, the next thing is, before we even talk about like the actual tools themselves, one of the things that is super important is your knowledge base, right? And your knowledge base is really important. Now, what is your knowledge base? Sometimes people are like, what is it? It's templates that you might use for your business. For example, you might have like sales templates or scripts. You might have templates that you use when you onboard a new client. It's video instructions, right? Like if you're quickly doing a video for someone to then go do, it can be written instructions, Giphies, like all of this stuff that you utilize to have instruction for your people need to live somewhere. Now, what usually happens is, we're like, okay, I need something done, right? And so we may or may not give instruction. We're like, I need this thing done. And then we get it back and we're like, wait, that's not what I asked for, right? So one of my favorite things right now is I'm like really into this Tesla Roadster that's in space, right? I'm like fascinated by it. And so I'm like, imagine if Elon Musk was like, I want to put a car in space with no instructions, right? And someone was like, here's a Jeep. He's like, no. I want a Roadster that goes like, from 0 to 60 in 0.019 seconds. It's a very different conversation because he's saying, what does he want? He's giving criteria. And if you've ever been into the Tesla factory, like I have a friend who works for Tesla in their actual production factory, like there's manuals for everything. There's instructions for everything. People know exactly what they're supposed to do, right? Everything that gets put onto that conveyor belt has a purpose, instructions, criteria, like what to do. And so when we ask people like, hey, I want this thing done, and then we're like frustrated because we're like, it's not what I wanted, and we didn't review it. We didn't, we didn't take a look at it. It's because we also didn't give them instructions. And so in Voltaire's words, common sense is not that common. Right? We really got to make things, and I hate using this term, but I use it all the time, but they got to be dummy proof, right? So that when we ask for that Roadster that's going to go into space, we get that Roadster that's going to go into space. We don't get some other automobile. All right. Very cool. I'm very passionate about documentation. Now, documents are great and instructions are awesome, but you can't track a document, right? So you do need a tool to help you actually track the progress of projects, right? So that way, if you're, whether it's just you, right? Sometimes it's just like, okay, what am I doing? And as you start to get to capacity, it gets even worse, right? Because like you forget, clients start blending into each other. You're like, oh, what was that thing? And so, but if it's you and a team, you want to be able to know what they're doing. and be able to track the progress. And that progress can look like anything from, you're onboarding a new client, to you're optimizing a campaign, to you're putting up a social, media editorial calendar, right? Like all of these things have processes and you have a way of doing them. So now it depends on where you're going to put them, right? Now, if you're a freelancer, like if it's just you and you need to track things, you're just tracking the deadlines, because everyone needs to track the deadlines. We can use something that's more of like a freemium model, like an Asana or a Trello or an Airtable. These things are really easy to adopt. They don't cost any money. And you don't have any users, or if you have a couple of users, right? Like it's relatively inexpensive and it gets your project management going. Now, if you look at the bottom, like, the price is based on users. Usually, there's a couple of them that are not user-based, meaning the price isn't based on how many people you have. I think Basecamp is one of the few that I know that does that. It's just like a flat fee. But most of them will give you, some sort of like under 15 users, there's a price point to that. Now, if it's you and a flexible team and you have a multitude of projects, and I usually say the breaking point on your projects is around like 12 to 15. Like that's where you're like, oh, I need to upgrade. So that's the breaking point. And so with that, now you need to be able to see across projects. And that's usually the point where you're like, oh, maybe I should start hiring a project manager or someone, or at least a project coordinator, like someone to help me with this stuff to make sure things don't fall through the cracks. And with that, we then need a dashboard, because you want to be able to see what things are coming about. So good tools for this are like GetFlow, Red Booth, Rike, Active Collab. All these have pros and cons, and I'm happy to like answer some of that stuff during Q&A. But you want to be able to see across your different projects. Then if you're a bigger business and you've got, like 20 plus employees, then you're at the point where you're needing to track profitability with your project manager. That's a whole other ballgame, right? And so in that, we're looking at Teamwork, Monday, Acello, more time tracking integration and all of that stuff. So it gets a little bit more elevated. And the one thing that I would say is don't go straight to like the really like the souped up project manager, because sometimes I see that. And the reason why you don't want to do that is because you want to manage your cash flow, right? Like you don't want to go to something that's super clunky if you don't need it. You can, but it's just not a good use of resources. So I always tell people to kind of just up level with where they're at so that they can manage cash. And again, that goes back to your profitability. All right. So I say no to things falling through the cracks. All right. All of that. I always hear like, oh my God, like you just say no, like really take a stand for having smooth operations and making sure that these things don't happen. And how do we go about doing that? So one of the most important things, and it sounds really, really simple, is put due dates on things, right? Like actually have due dates. And so even if they're fuzzy due dates, right? So what I mean by that is like, even if it's like, oh, okay, this is on deck for, what are we in April? Like this is on deck for June, then like kind of just put that in like the June pile or like the future pile, but give it some sort of timeline. Because what will happen is you have a project management system and you have stuff, right? And let's say you don't have due dates or you do have due dates. Then other stuff comes in and then you're like, oh, I have to get this stuff done. And then other stuff comes in. And if there's no due dates and you have fuzzy due dates, you can't move any of the dates because there's nothing to do. So it's hard to track and really prioritize. And when that happens, it's hard to tell your people like what they need to work on. So, so many times I hear my clients like, oh man, it's like our project manager isn't prioritizing. And I'm like, okay, well, did you give them the priorities that you wanted? No, because, like the business is doing this and we want this, but our people are like concentrating on this. So it's really getting clear and giving people that understanding. And even if it's just for yourself, it's like, what are my priorities? Like, what do I really need to get done? Like, what's going to move the business forward? So that's that. Then there's milestones for check-ins. So, really, so beyond like the actual due date for the project or the service or the client, we want to have milestones in between to be able to check in and review, right? So that if someone gives you the plans for the car, right? And you're like, wait, why is this a truck? You're able to see that way before you get a physical truck, right? Because then you're like, wait, that's not what I wanted. And then you're not like all mad and frustrated, right? So we want to be able to check in between before the whole project is complete. And that's going to allow us to course correct. And then I'm going to reemphasize that, like, if it's a new task, you want a really quick check-in right before, because sometimes you'll have people that work with you and they're phenomenal and they're so great. But their concept of something wasn't your concept of something. And if you give a quick instruction, and I'm so guilty of this, like, even when I know, I'm like, oh man, like, I didn't give them any instructions. I wasn't clear on the criteria. They're going to go off and they're going to hand me something. And then I'm like, poof, I'm off to a sales call, or like, I'm off to do a presentation, or I'm off to do something. And I know that I'm going to get something that's not what I wanted. So if I don't do a quick check-in, it's just going to completely go in another direction. I've had that happen. I'm like, entire projects where I'm like, so doing that quick check-in is really important. Then there's the backlog management. It's, it's that whole like pile up that you get, and being able to say, okay, like, how do we, rearrange things and make sure that, we're changing those due dates, or we're moving stuff like off of it, or we're like, you know what, this is no longer relevant, like, cross it off. I had a client who we worked a lot on his project management stuff, and he had clients that would pay him on retainer, which is great. Right. But, they were like corporate clients. And so he was doing blogs for them. And he had blogs from that were in his project management still there from 2016. And it was like insane. And no one was actually managing. So what happened with the project management system is that it was completely cluttered with stuff that wasn't no longer relevant. Right. And I mean, the client didn't care. Like, they just kept paying him, and I mean, which is great for him. But like, in terms of his team, it was just messy. And no one was like dealing with all of the backlog. And lastly, it's status updates. Right. So being able to put due dates is great, but not knowing where people are along the way can get really funky as well, because you don't know what people are working on. So these are kind of like the 5 things to make sure that things don't fall through the cracks and that you're actually meeting deadlines. And I would say that this is one of the most important things for all of project management. Now, what usually happens is, like I said before, we're like, here's a task or here's a project, go. And what happens is also, there's a couple things. Sometimes we have people that like have been with us all the time. So we're like, okay, well, they just know how to do this. Other times we have someone that's new and we're like, they're so talented, right? So like, of course they know what they're supposed to be doing, right? So go. Then it's like, I don't have time to do any of this. So go. Like, as I said, like, I'm guilty. I'm like, I gotta go to sales call. Just go do it, right? Give me something, anything. And then other times, we're like not sure. So we're like, well, we'll see what they come up with. Maybe it might be better than what I have. It might be interesting. Go. Right. So there's this whole mentality of like, go. And then if we don't put these things in place and we're not checking in and we're not doing this, it's like, it's craziness. And then we're like, why did I get a Jeep instead of a Roadster? This is not what I asked for. So then there's that whole frustration. So what I recommend is, when you're dealing with your project management, right? First of all, you want to create repeatable workflows, right? And I'll go into what those look like in a second. But, and workflows, which is a little jargony, right? Can be just a checklist, right? It's a checklist that you're going to put inside of whatever project manager you're using. So it can be your Asana, your Trello, your GetFlow, and really having that checklist there. Then it's assigning people those, first assigning 2 people. So even if those people are you, right, assigning those to yourself, and making sure that you've got the stickies and the to-dos and all of that inside of a project management system in one place. And assigning milestones and deadlines. Then we want to have an actual time to review all those things, right? Because lots of times we'll put stuff in there and we'll kind of check them off, but there's no review, and then things start getting wonky. And reprioritizing, right? We want to reprioritize because we get new clients in, we get new priorities, we get new business goals, right? Like you guys are you have new business goals all the time. So really like saying what's still relevant and sometimes grouping things. You're like, oh wow, like if I group this stuff, like I can just knock it all out at one time, right? So that creates efficiency. Now, in terms of a workflow or a checklist inside of your project manager, it looks something like this, right? So this is one that's particularly in Asana, right? And as I see, I'm like, ooh, one of these does not have a person. I like set up Intuit accounts on Electro. I was like, there's no one doing that. There's no accountability. So that's something that I would look for. And then also making sure that this has due dates. Now, a lot of the management systems, the project management systems, which are really cool, is that when you set up a template, as you can see, this is a template, it will allow you to pre-populate, if you have a consistent team, people already in there. So for example, if you're setting up a website and you know that you have to do, let's say, marketing analytics or AdWords analytics, and you're doing like a technical deployment, for instance, you have consistent people that are doing that, you can set up the template to already have the assignees on there, which is really cool because then when you copy it for a new client, it gets pre-populated. So you're saving yourself all that time that you don't even have to think about, right? So you're doing all that like upfront work, which is really cool. And then you can set up inside of your project manager all of these different templates, right? So you can have templates for your actual production, templates for client management, for account management, for sales. And not like sales, because you should be using a CRM for that, but anything related to like your sales ops, right? That you can do that. All right. Now, there's the workflows that are, I would say, like project specific, and then there's the recurring checklist, right? So you might have things that, might be like across projects that you have individual people doing on a recurring basis. And, this is also neat to be able to have those there as templates, and you can add to them and you can update them all the time. But, you may have daily, right? So daily, depending on how much client volume you have, you might be answering client questions. If you're doing anything in social, you might be doing social commenting, or somebody is. You have weekly, right? So for some people, it might be doing like weekly sweeps of client questions if they don't have that many volume, or like if you're SEO and you're not really dealing with them, but you want to make sure that that client information doesn't fall through the cracks. It could be like if you're checking ad spend, right? Depending on, like, let's say for more mature accounts where your bidding optimization is still on point, you would be doing maybe like budget sweeps, right? So that's a weekly activity. It could be content creation, all of this, right? So in that we have weekly, and these obviously can be a lot more comprehensive. I just wanted to give you guys an idea of what goes into these, right? And then quarterly, and some of these are really great for yourself, like, estimate tax payments and campaign assessments and looking at your numbers, right? I think looking at your numbers is something that's really, really important as you're doing all of this, work, right? Because we want to make sure that we're measuring all of the work that we're doing. Right. All right. Then, you have all of these tasks, and we talked a little bit about creating ownership of the tasks and accountability. One of the worst things that, at least that I hate saying, is, what are you working on? Like for me, like that's I'm like, like that is another indicator that something is not happening in my project management. Or when clients are like, I have this person and I just don't know what they're working on anymore. And I'm like, like, why? Like, we're not tracking. So we want to make sure that we know what people are working on. It's really important. The other thing is not only making sure that what they're working on, but how are they performing in that, stuff that they are working on. So it's not only like, because we can't even measure performance. We can't even know if they're doing a good job or not if we don't even know what they're working on. So really stating all of the tasks. So inside your project manager, like I had showed you the checklist, it's really good. And most project managers will allow you to sort by person, right? So you can then go and see like, okay, what are the assignments for this individual? right? And so we're able to look at that by the person. But if you go to that inside of your project manager and they're not working on anything, it's because one, they weren't assigned to anything, or maybe they're not, I don't know, maybe they're running the clock, right? But like that gives you a lot of information. So really being able to do that and see, and also as your teams get bigger, like I get this a lot with account managers, it's knowing what the account managers are up to, because people can start to get very overwhelmed. So you want to make sure that you're not burning out your employees. So that's another reason of like also knowing how much ownership and accountability they have. All right. Review. Reviewing the work. I think all business owners are like so guilty of not reviewing work. Like I know that I am. Like I finally just got to a place where like my review has become really consistent and I enjoy it. But usually I'm like, I hate review. And most people do too. But the problem with if you don't review, then your stuff gets stuck, right? Like the conveyor belt stops. And then you're like, wait, but why is this stuff going? Because you're not reviewing it and they don't know what to do. Or the conveyor belt will continue and then your output isn't what you want it to be if you haven't put in the work, right, beforehand. So reviewing once or twice a week, depending on how much volume you have and reprioritizing things. Also inside of your project manager, depending on what you have, is making sure that if something is getting handed off from one person to the next person, that you're creating either triggers or dependencies. And like Asana calls them triggers, Teamwork calls them dependencies, so that the work doesn't stop, right? Like it doesn't halt on one person. It can continue. So for instance, if you're doing, I don't know, it's just 'cause I'm looking at you, Jonathan. If you're doing if you're doing, let's say, a technical deployment of a marketing campaign, and then you need someone to start creating campaign graphics, right? Like that's kind of two different skill sets. You usually have two different people doing that, but there's a dependency on there where you're like one thing stops and then the other one continues. So that kind of sequential stuff that happens in project management, you can actually create inside of your PM system so that you're making sure that stuff still flows, which is really cool. Then it's being able to have like reporting and seeing like, okay, what are all of the outstanding tasks? Like what's the stuff that isn't meeting deadline or that's outside of the milestones, so that you can then really manage and be like, oh my God, I have to review this stuff. And that allows you to do some decision making and being like, oh, okay, like I can take on more clients or I can't. And what you start to see is if your project management starts to be on point, you increase your capacity and you can take on more clients, which is a beautiful thing, right? Because before you were like, I don't know, I'm not sure, I feel like, but then you actually know, you're like, oh wow, we have like this much amount of capacity, we can take on 2 more clients and your revenue goes up. So it's a beautiful thing for profitability. One of the things that I always tell people is to put a time inside of your calendar to review work. Right? And it sounds, again, very simple, but literally a lot, whether it's half an hour or an hour, depending on how much review you need to do, and just insert it inside of your calendar so that it exists there, and then other people can't schedule on top of it. And that's one thing. The other thing is that sometimes that doesn't even work. Like I'll have people that put stuff inside their calendar. So like put it inside your calendar as something that you'll remember. Like I used to put it as like, when I really hated it, I was like, unclog the bottleneck. That's what I like, and that was my calendar thing to myself, because it reminded me that I was a bottleneck, and if I didn't review, like work got stuck. So that was my little thing. The other thing that makes it easier to review is screenshots. I'm like a huge fanatic of screenshots, and I tell my team, if I can't review your work as I'm standing in line at the supermarket, it isn't reviewable. And what I mean by that is I don't want to go from my PM system into like my automation system and into here and into there and into everything. Like just take a screenshot, put it inside of the project management under the comments so that I can see it. Now, if I need to go and dig deeper, I can, but at least I know what the output is looking like at the moment. And that's huge, right? Because I'm able to like take all of my stuff, do my review, and I do now I call it crew review instead of unclog the bottleneck because I have a better context for it. But I do my crew review in like 20 minutes a day max. And it's fast. So you want to be able to do that. Right? And most people are visual. So that's, a couple of little hacks on how to, hack your review, because I know most people hate doing it. All right. Lastly, the super project manager. So we're going to either optimize you, get someone who's optimized, or optimize someone else. And that's doing the super project manager is important. It's so important that I've had clients and, you know, who come to me because their project management's all messed up and they think the project management is messed up. And actually sometimes the project management is great. You know, I mean, it can use a little tweaking here and there, but the person who's managing the projects, right? Like who's supposed to be that like supervisor of the conveyor belt is like on snooze. And so they're like, you know, so they're like, their conveyor belt's going, but the person who's watching the conveyor, like, is just, you know, there's no components are not being put in, and it's awful. And people will keep people that are not effective for a really long time for so many different reasons, which is a whole other presentation. But the longer you keep that person, it's going to cost you money, and you're just bleeding money. So having a really effective project manager is so important for your projects. All right. So who do we hire? Right, like you need to hire a taskmaster. So many times people will tell me that like, oh, I'm gonna get someone in the team that's like really creative and they're really good at this, so I'm gonna have them go and like do project management. Like, no, right? I mean, sometimes the creative person, right, like can do it, right, because they have all of the other qualities, but a lot of the times you're like trying to take an apple and stuff it into a football. And like, it doesn't, you know, like you're turning an apple, like a beautiful fruit, into something that's like not even organic, right? Like it doesn't work. So we want to make sure that like, cause project management it's a specific thing. Like you need someone who, I mean, I have like an execution ninja, right? Like you would want someone who's able to do that execution and is going to be there. Like you also, you know, there's also like the whole thing about making sure that the workload gets going. So you don't want someone who's like really, not like that they're really nice, because I think niceness is great, but someone who's afraid of conflict, someone who can't be assertive. Because a lot of the time, like you need someone who's able to be like, hey, we need to get this stuff done, right? And so you need a person who's okay with that, right? Who's okay with asserting the projects. And also like, you know, not someone who can't pay attention to detail. Because remember, the most important thing is that things don't fall through the cracks and we're meeting deadlines. So you want someone who's able to pay attention to detail. All right. So that is your super manager. And let me see, how are we doing on time? I have you guys blocked. My time thing here is blocked. Oh, okay, we're still good. All right. So, I mean, as you can see, one of our friends was able to, you know, clients was like reduce workload like 20 hours per client just by doing project management. It's huge. Actually, this person who's really, really awesome, Greg, he was able to get his project management on point so much that he was in Costa Rica and was able to do all of his client review in 1 week in 15 minutes. And like, that's all he did. He was in Costa Rica. I don't know. I think he was like learning how to surf or something with his girlfriend. And he did his client, you know, he did all of his project management review, 15 minutes in and out during the entire week and was gone. Like, it was the most beautiful thing. Like, I got an email with like pictures and the whole, like, it was gorgeous. And that's what great project management can do for you, is that it really can free you to do either grow the business or have a life. And a great project manager can do that for the team. So that's huge. All right. Now, here's my favorite part of all my presentations. Some of the project management hacks, right? So like, I'm always about like, how do we make things like, you know, how do we create this and so that it's easy, and hack the system a little bit. So one of them is, it's using the tool. So one of the biggest issues with using the actual tool is, one, you using it, right? Like actually using the tool. And two, it's having the resistance of your team using it, right? And so it's like whether or not they're inside of your project manager. And you want to be able to get out of your inbox, right? Getting out of your inbox is huge. You want to not communicate with your team via your inbox because, again, things fall through the cracks. So as much work and communication as you can get done in your project manager, it's also I mean, if you use Google, and sometimes I'll get this from clients, it's like, well, I can just search for the thing, right? Like you could just do a search. I'm like, yeah, but you're doing the search and then you're checking out your chat and then you're checking out this. And then you're spending so much time trying to figure out. And then you're also trying to contextualize your project. So I have a client who does social media. All right. Well, she does like traditional and social media. And she was really resistant to using a project management tool for a while. And she's like, well, why can't I manage through my inbox? And I looked at her, right, because she was doing a screenshot. I was like, because you have 1,400 emails right now. I was like things are just falling through. She's like, oh, that's right. And then when she started using it, she's like, oh, this is amazing. But then getting her team to use it was a whole other story. So one of the little hacks is when you start to do this, right? And I'm about to write a whole article on like how to adopt tool and like deal with resistance. But one of the little things is when they email you, or let's say someone tries to text you, or whatever communication style that they have that isn't what you want, right? Because you want them to get to use a tool, you respond to them inside of the tool, right? So like eventually they'll stop emailing you and respond to you inside of the tool. So you want to condition them inside of the tool time and time again. So that way, like they're like, hey, this client, blah, blah, blah. And inside your client project, you're like, blah, 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 right? Like, so you want to do that inside of the tool and start to condition people. All right. Another cool thing is finding workarounds, right? So remember I had talked about like either having like a dashboard or status reports, and not all tools will do that. And we don't want to go to the super clunky tools right now or like the really expensive ones. But one of the like really quick, like kind of workarounds for status reports, because some tools don't have status reports, is to just create your own status, right? So whether it's like, some people like to color coordinate it. So it's like, yellow, green, red, or I think I'm putting that in the wrong order, but like go, like you're in the middle and you're about, and you're done. Or whether or not, like, so I use Basecamp, love Basecamp, but they don't have status reports. So what we do is inside of every single task, when someone is currently doing something, they just bracket it and they say review, or they say, if I need to review it, because like they'll assign it to me, or they'll put it and they say working, right? So like I know that when I go into all of my assignments and I'm like, oh, what is, this coordinator doing? I can see everything that they're working on, right? So they have the due dates and I know exactly what it is that's answering my question. Like, are you working on this yet? Did you start yet? Right? Like, I don't ever want to ask that question because they're already putting it in brackets that they started or that they're working on it or needs a review, right? So that's a little workaround that gives you some status reports. Another one is getting client requests, right? So a lot of the times I hear, okay, well, the client will request something and then my team or I need to go ahead and like finish the project or add to the project or get the deliverability of it. So how do I get my email and my project management to talk? So one of that is most project managers will have, and as you can see in the slide, like a weird, funky link, right? And so they'll have it and, either to a board or a project or something. So if you create a board or a project, let's say you call it client request or client intakes or client, don't drop the ball, whatever you want to call that particular project. And then inside of your email, right, or inside of your team's emails, you make sure that everyone saves that link. And so all the client communication that comes in gets sent into your project manager. So then your PM or yourself can then sort and see what's in scope, see what's outside of scope, see if it's a crazy request or if it's like an easy request. And then you can start managing the different requests that your clients do into the appropriate projects, right? And it also like allows you to prioritize. And then if you have account managers, if you start getting like massive requests from one client, and then you can start to see like, oh, wow, that account manager is getting overwhelmed by this client. And is that profitable, right? Like, are we pricing the client correctly? So it allows you to do all that. Then the last thing is inside of project management, I often get asked like, well, how do I manage client projects versus my own projects, right? And it starts to get like messy. So I always tell people, create yourself as a client inside of your project management system. So the same way that you would do for other clients you create it for yourself, right? And then you kind of divide it that way so your team knows when it's an internal project versus an external one. All right, cool. I guess those are all my hacks. Do you guys have any questions?
Let me make sure that I'm off mute. Okay. So one of the biggest issues I have, and I have to say, you know, if you haven't already done David Allen, a lot of what you're saying is getting things done.
Oh,
so
yeah, I love David Allen.
Right. So I'm a huge fan of that. And I found the most ideal program called OmniFocus. So it's on my desktop, it's on my iPad, it's on my phone. So nothing falls through the cracks because I got a place to dump it all and I can process it later. So it's an ideal situation. The problem is this. Great for managing me.
I know, not good for teams.
And I am right at the point now where I am building this team. And I don't know how to rectify the two because I love OmniFocus and it works so well. So do I have to give that up to work with Asana, which I don't love so much?
It's okay. I know OmniFocus is beautiful if you're in the Mac environment as a solopreneur, right? Like those are the two criteria, and it's a beautiful, beautiful program. Once you sort of break one of those two criteria, the whole thing breaks down. So what I would say to you, the same way that I say to everybody is, you know, this is a great problem to have. You're leveling up, and you should never marry your systems. Okay. Like right now you're married and it feels like a divorce and right. And so like, you know, and like, it's very, very significant. So you should never marry your systems because chances are you're going to be changing them. All right. You're at the breaking point. If you need a team, OmniFocus doesn't work well with teams, unfortunately, because it's a beautiful environment. So
they update it all the time. I don't know why they can't find a way to update it to work for teams.
And you know what? It is just what is going on in the industry right now, you know, like, and so in this app environment, it's time for you to level up, my friend.
Right. So then that brings me to the other issue, because I've been on the receiving end of this, which is, so people have Basecamp and Teamwork, and I'm supposed to be working on those platforms. And with the volume of stuff coming in, I don't always go onto those clients' platforms. So just so you understand, agency hire me on, right? So now I've got to deal with, you know, do I respond to the email or do I jump into Teamwork for one agency? Do I go into Basecamp for another one? And then I have to take all this and coordinate it with my team. It's mind-boggling. So how do you deal with that situation, or can you?
So there's two ways to deal with that. One, when you get a new client, try to convert them to whatever your system is. Right now, that usually works about like 75% of the time if you're very like good and convincing. But if you're being white label, chances are like no shot, right? Yeah. So right, like so what you want to do is have your system, and if you can, use something like Zapier or, or sometimes what they'll do is that they'll integrate, like a lot of these teams will have Slack, and Slack itself will do the integration, right? So find a way to integrate it back into your system so that you can manage it in like with your team on your system, which sounds like it's creating double work. But what will happen is you're over here and you're over there and you don't actually know what's happening in terms of your projects across the board. So you need a place to be able to manage projects across the board. So see if, I think the easiest integration, if they all have it, is Slack, because Slack can like ping you and then ping there, which is pretty easy. If not, check out other ones. So there's, to integrate into one thing. But
well, I'm already using Slack, and the way I'm using it is I have direct channels for every client, and whatever team is working on it, those members are invited to the direct channel. That's okay, because I can kind of see what people are working on, and they kind of put in what they're working on. They put it into the Slack channel. It doesn't bother anybody else. It's only for the people on that.
Yeah.
That's not really a project manager.
It's not. So Slack is a communications manager, not a project manager. What I'm saying is that Slack as a communications manager has integrations, right? So like their APIs, so like you're able to like ping from here to here, almost like a Zapier would. That may work. I haven't played with it as much, like when you're doing all that. Check out Zapier. I think there's another one called PySync. And there's a couple of ones that will like automate it so that you can just basically, you want to take your different pieces and then funnel them to one project manager. So
are you saying that by using Slack, I could somehow connect Asana and Teamwork, for instance?
sometimes you can double check it, because I know like Asana and Basecamp, like if something happens in Asana, it'll like ping Basecamp sometimes, and vice versa. So see if you can ping 1, 2. So like if you can do that, play with that, and then we can always talk offline about like automations. But you wanna be able to grab your stuff and then funnel it into 1 p.m.
Yeah, that would be great. Now, as far as project, is there somebody else? I can't see other people. I know I want to hog up all the time. Are there other people who have questions?
Yeah, James, Jennifer, do you guys have a question? No?
No, I don't. I'm just listening.
All right, Jonathan.
Okay, so the next question is, at a certain point, I'll be ready for a project manager. How much should I be paying for a project manager? Can you get project managers like, from Upwork, somebody who can work part-time, or am I looking at, some sort of full-time employee?
It depends, right? So if you're looking for just a PM, right? So there's a difference between project manager, but then a lot of the times when people first try to get a project manager, they'll try to do like a project manager and account manager because they want them to be like interfacing with clients. Yeah. Okay. So I'm just like kind of giving that. So in terms of project managers, you can get someone off Upwork. I would say, see if you can get someone on a fixed price point. You get decent people like in Romania or the Philippines right now. And you're looking at like, if you want like a full-time person, somewhere between like $400 to $800 a month on a fixed price point. If you're looking for US, right, then you're looking at a salary of like, 45 to sometimes like 75K, right, for the year. So it kind of varies. I think if you're just starting off, and you're not looking for an AM, that's why I asked, right? Because if you want someone that's client facing or client interacting, like you need the language and the communication. But if it's just sort of like the task manager that's doing the work, then I would outsource first. And then that person can actually help you develop a lot of your PM systems along the way.
Okay. Good.
Right. And even now, I would suggest, starting to use, like, you can get a VA to help you start to create some of these systems so that when a PM comes on board, they're not starting from scratch. Right. And you can do that really cost effectively.
Is there any thought in setting up a project manager? Is there any like secret sauce to doing it in a certain way? Obviously, you start with a client and you assign the people who will be working to that client, and then there are tasks, and usually there's some sort of calendar involved. I used Asana a couple of years ago. I never really loved it, but I know it's changed since I was using it. Is there any kind of tutorial or any sort of things that I should be looking out for or reading or learning about before I jump into using a project manager? Like, for instance, reading David Allen's book before you start using OmniFocus.
No, like there's a million tools out there, but the most important thing is just start using it. Right? Like that's the most important thing. And also these applications, like, at least the ones that have been around for a while, they're constantly updating. Right? Like I used to hate Basecamp. I used to be like one of the most like I'm eating my words. Like I love Basecamp now. Like, good thing that I'm like able to evolve, right? Like I used to be one of like the biggest, like I used to throw it so much shade. I was like, oh my God, I hate Basecamp. They've done massive integrations. And it's like, I couldn't be happier. It's one of my favorite tools right now.
Yeah, so, as long as they upgrade, because the person, she had us like on Basecamp 1 or 2, and she was on,
Yeah, it was awful. But just know that Asana has upgraded. And if you don't like Asana, but you want something Asana-esque, GetFlow is really cool.
GetFlow?
Yeah, so check out GetFlow if you're linear and you're looking for something like that, but you want a little bit more user interface involved, GetFlow is really great. And I think for where you are, GetFlow is probably better. Okay.
One other question. Now, I've been using Text Expander myself, again, Mac environment, but you can do Text Expander. I think it might go over to PC. The idea for me is like, for instance, onboarding clients. I just need to type in like a couple of characters and everything I need for that email or whatever, it's all saved. So I'll just need to change a word here or there or the company name. But is there some sort of text expander function that's involved, that's already integrated with any of these project managers? Because that way I could say, do the onboarding process, and they don't have to look for a document. They type in, a couple of characters, and the email that they need for the first email is there.
Okay, so that's a couple of different notions that you're putting in, right? So like when you're doing text expander inside of your email, that's like your email templates, right? And so that's usually going to be your CRM, not your project manager when you're communicating with clients. So that's one. Two, what you're thinking about is like, okay, if like it's the instructions and where are the instructions, that goes back to that knowledge base or that wiki, right? So that you're not doing it every single time. Like you just want to be able to point them and have a link to where it is, right? Like I'm a huge proponent of Google Sites because it's free and it's really, really easy to set up. And it works great inside of the Google environment if you have it. And it's just a great knowledge base, right? So inside of your project manager, you want to be able to say like, here's a link to the instructions, right? Inside of those different tasks. And you set that up as a workflow. And every single time you copy the workflow, you don't have to do it at all. You don't have to type anything. You just hit copy, workflow. That's it, right? Or like copy checklist. So so it's like your idea of a text expander, but like on steroids. It's a little super.
Well, the idea of a text expander is that no matter who's working with me, they present things to the client with the company, the way the company wants to be presented. So we all use the same expansion. So whatever it is. Now, are you saying that you can do in a checklist fashion?
Yeah. So what you would want to do is start managing your clients, right? Like off of a client relationship manager, which is a little bit different than a project manager. And you want to have your templates already there, right? So something to be tech agnostic is that instead of using your text expander, you want to copy all of those templates and make sure that they live somewhere else that your team can use.
Got it. Well, okay. Because text expander, I can have multiple people using it.
Yeah, so it's fine.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. That's cool.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much, Juliana. Very informative. So many tips.
All right. Very cool.
Thanks
for having me.
Thanks, Juliana. This was great and really helpful to me. I appreciate it.